I really focused on the analytics, understanding business models, understanding, really what generated money and how money was made in the business and what the margins were. And before you know it, I had zeroed in on a couple of franchise concepts that were emerging at the time, and I ended up becoming a franchisee. And then I became a multi-unit franchisee, opening up a number of locations. And then I graduated from that and actually acquired what are called regional franchise rights. And that's where a franchise company is generally not located in a specific geography. In this case, in California and on the West Coast, the company that I was a franchisee to and then a regional franchisee to was based in Denver. And they didn't know a lot about the California market. And, I had spent most of my career there. And so I decided that I would acquire the regional franchise rights and help them grow their franchise concept in this part of the world. And I really got pretty good at it. And we opened up, nearly 30, 35 units on that franchise concept. And then I said, hey, this is a lot of fun. And so I went looking for other franchise concepts for companies franchise companies that weren't located in the West Coast markets, and ended up acquiring an additional 3 franchise concepts where I was first a franchisee, then a regional franchisee. And I had this little regional franchising business that I was doing fairly well at. And then the opportunity really came where I could acquire one of the franchise companies that I was a regional franchise to. And so during this process, I was growing and building these regional franchise concepts. And with each of them, I would have an exit. I would find others to sell the franchise to or the regional franchise to. And I became really pretty good at this whole process. And eventually I ended up acquiring a franchise company myself, and repositioning it and growing it, and even starting a franchise company. And since then, I have started a number of other companies, and each of those had my exit. And so the last exit that I had was kind of at a different scale than I had been dealing with before. A lot of the earlier exits I'd had in my career didn't have a lot of complexity to them. I was able to find someone to acquire the business and to grow it. And they were pretty straightforward discussions and purchase and sales agreements. But this last exit was kind of at a different scale. And when I stepped away from the business, I just got to thinking, I thought I would just sort of fade away, kind of fade to black, if you will. And I would, kind of take life in the slow lane for a while. After you've been working hard and growing and scaling a business for years and sometimes decades, you kind of want to smell the roses and take it easy and enjoy life a little bit. And I thought that's what I was going to do. Instead of having the pedal to the metal, I was really going to move over to that slow lane and just coast for a while. Well, I was not anticipating how boring the slow lane can be, and got kind of bored. And I got to thinking about all of the exits that I'd had and the business experience that I had with the different concepts that I had, started from scratch or acquired over the years. And especially that last exit where it was a little bit different scale, and I should have known more about the process of how to optimize and maximize exit value and business value so you could put more money in your pocket after you sell the business. And I thought, there's a lot of other entrepreneurs out there. I bet if they had a little bit more insight into how to position their companies for sale, they could do better. They would end up actually putting a lot more money in their pocket if they had kind of a coach or a mentor or at least some insights. And that's what I decided to do. I love podcasting. So I said, I'm going to start a podcast. And that's kind of what I did. I decided that I was going to start a podcast, and I did. I launched a podcast, and that podcast is called Business Exit Stories. And what I do is that I invite not the entrepreneurs that had sold the business, not those type of individuals that share their personal journey, but the actual deal makers of entrepreneurs that sell their business. And I really thought that this would be something that would work really well and that I could grow and actually help people sell their business and give them insights on how to optimize their value. And I would do this by sharing these experiences on the podcast, some of the great stories with the great exits where people did very well, and some that didn't go so well, where these entrepreneurs really dropped the ball on the last lap of their race and, kind of getting to the finish line where they were going to exit and sell their business. And they dropped that baton. And the exit stories that they share, those advisors, M&A specialists, mergers and acquisition advisors, investment bankers, business brokers, CPAs, wealth managers, people that are really involved in that whole transaction flow. They share those stories on the podcast. And it's just been a fascinating journey. And so what I thought I would share with you today is some of those learnings and some of those insights that I've had as I have grown and the podcast and shared them. So I want to talk a little bit about why my whole experience is relevant to you. Because I have really been where you have been. And more importantly, I know that at some point in time in the future, I know where you're going to be. I know that you're going to have to be thinking about stepping away from your business. And selling a business is likely going to be one of the largest and most significant financial events any entrepreneur will have in their life. Probably the largest asset that is on their balance sheet, other than their house, is the business that they own. And if it's such a significant portion of their total net worth, then you should probably pay a little bit of attention how to optimize and to maximize that value. And really, that's what I think you are going to happen. And there's really only three things that can happen to a business. One, if you really think about it, you're going to pass it on to someone that you already know. Now, this may be a family member. It may be a partner that you have, like in my situation. I didn't have other family members working in my business, but I had a partner. And a lot of times partnerships don't work out, and you decide to sell the business because you aren't getting along, or one partner doesn't want to buy out the other partner. And so you really need to think about, selling to a partner if that is an option. Or you may sell it to an employee or maybe a management team. So that is one type of event that will happen in your business, is really that you're going to sell your business when you exit to someone that's internal to you, that you know, and the type of things that they're going to need to know about the business are different than the next kind of person that you're going to sell to. And that's really to someone that you don't know. This is someone that is a third party. It may be an individual, it may be another company, it may be a competitor. And one of the businesses that I exited from, I actually sold to a competitor. A competitor that I competed with day to day, but when it came time that I was thinking about exiting, that was one of the options that was on the table. Do I sell to, someone that would compete in the same marketplace? But what made sense to me at that point in time, and to the competitor that bought the company, my company at that time, it made sense for me to consider selling my business to him. And so, but it was a third party. And so the type of things that a third party is going to want to know about your business is entirely different than what someone that you know wants to know about your business, because they may already be familiar with it. And so that is something that you need to take into consideration. Really what you do is, to understand what the options are when you are talking either internally or externally. And of course, the third option, and generally not a very attractive one, is really to liquidate your business. And I'm really amazed, quite frankly, at how many people, especially small scale businesses that are really focused on the individual that has some kind of technical expertise that he is selling, uh, that they will opt to liquidate voluntarily. They will exit the business by just selling their assets. And I want to give you an example here. This is a real life example. A friend of mine was that type of individual, that he had built up a business and made a great living, quite frankly, was doing really well. But he was selling a core competency. He had a high degree of expertise in his business. And he thought that nobody, it would be very difficult to find someone with the same level of expertise. And he didn't really think that was a possibility. And so he had made the decision to just sell his assets. And that assets were, some computers and some equipment that he had in his business. And he was just going to kind of hold an auction and sell these things online. And he thought he might get $20,000 or $30,000 for all of that equipment, and that he would step away and just, he'd had a good run. He had built up some investments on the side and some real estate and stock portfolio. And that was how he's going to fund his retirement. And so that was his strategy. He was going to exit voluntarily. And so that's what he decided to do. And I found out this is what he was doing. And I got a hold of him and we sat down and chatted. And I said, tell me a little bit about your thinking, what you're going to do. And he just explained that he had gotten to a point where he wanted to take some more time, travel with his wife, visit the grandkids, and that he just wanted to retire. And that his strategy was just to sell off the assets. And I said, well, do you realize the goodwill that you've built up over the 20, 25 years that you've been in business? That has value. And we talked a little bit about his customer list. He had like 400 or 500 customers that generated revenue for him, that he had deep relationships with, that they trusted him. He had a website. He was well known in the industry. He had contacts in the industry where he'd get referrals from. And as we chatted through this, I kept dropping, ideas and sharing with him that all these things that he had spent over 2 decades building had value, and a lot more value than he was given. What he was going to do was sell off the hard assets in his business and step away from his business. And that was going to be the sum total of all of his hard work, for all that goodwill, for all the customers, for the website, for the tools that he had created. He was just going to retire and put them on the shelf and kind of walk away. And so after chatting with him for a while, we were able to reposition his business and bring in an advisor to help him reach out and contact people that might be interested in his website, in his customer list. And to make a very long story short, within less than 6 months, he was able to monetize all of that hard work. And he got between $200,000 and $300,000 for liquidating those goodwill, those intangible assets, if you will. He was able to get cash for those. And so if you can take a look, that he was willing to walk away from his business and sell his hard assets for $20,000 to $30,000, and he was able to reposition and tell a story to people that would be interested in some of his intangible assets, his goodwill, his website, his customer list, things of that nature. He walked away with 10x, literally 10 times more money than he thought that he was going to be able to get. And so that's kind of a voluntary liquidation when you're selling off things like that. And there's also the involuntary liquidation, and that is really where you're forced into liquidating because of financial difficulties. Sometimes this is referred as, a chapter 7 or 11 filing where you are forced into bankruptcy and you are forced to liquidate your assets or to reorganize, to restart and shed some of your liabilities. But when you really think about it, those are the only three things that can happen to your business. You're either going to pass that business on to someone that you know internally, you're going to sell it to a third party, or you're going to liquidate. Those are the only three options that you really have, unless you're going to live forever, that is. Now, if these are the only three choices that you have, you probably should pick one of them and start planning for that eventual exit. So I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to you, because if these are the choices that you have to step away from your business, you probably should think about which one applies to you, start thinking about that in advance, and sort of move toward trying to position your business and to optimize value with one of these three choices. And quite frankly, liquidating may be one of those. Probably not, but it might be an option for you. But I think that most people, probably 90 to 95% of all businesses that are, sold, and where the entrepreneur exit is number two, is the external to a third party. And if that's going to be the option, then you should probably think about how to best position your business to extract the most value out of the business. Now, the big question I get all of the time, and kind of the title to my presentation here, is why in the heck should I spend time thinking about selling my business when I'm so busy building it and scaling it? I'll do all that when the time arrives. And that's really the big question. Why should you take the time now to start planning for something that's going to happen 5 years, 10 years, maybe even longer down the road? Why would you start thinking about that now? And so really what I want to have you say is that some of the decisions that you make today will have a tremendous impact on the value of your business in the future. So I want you to think about that. So what type of those, decisions might be that you will make a decision today that will impact your value of your business in the future? And that's one of the reasons you should start thinking about what the future looks like. Successful exit can happen, but rarely happen. They don't happen by chance. You may be dumb lucky where you show up and you're getting ready to sell your business and the economy is booming. You're right kind of at the peak of where you're going, and you have a number of people that are interested in buying your business, and you just are able to monetize and sell your business without any problem. Those situations do happen. They can happen, but statistics will bear out, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in our discussion here today. They rarely happen. And so if they're not going to happen, then what you really need to do is start thinking that really successful exits are choreographed. They're carefully choreographed, and they aren't really shoot from the hip type of events. And one of the things that I've noticed about entrepreneurs, and maybe you fall into this category, I know at certain times in my career, I fell into this category, where I really enjoyed the thrill of getting up in the morning and going into the office and into the business that I was operating at the time, and just enjoyed the process of being confronted with problems and then kind of analyzing what the issues were, and then working through what I thought the solution to the problem was, and then executing that solution, and then seeing the result of that in kind of real time within a very short period of time, maybe the same day or a week or two down the road, where you see that solution actually solve the problem. And there is kind of a rush, this kind of adrenaline rush that you get from doing that. And that's kind of like what entrepreneurs, I think, as a general rule, they love that environment. They love the action. They love the thrill of solving problems and overcoming challenges and launching new products and working through issues with a competitor or with your employees or a new product that you've launched. And all these things is what gives the joy of being an entrepreneur and scaling and growing your business. And it is kind of a real-time shoot from the hip type of environment. And a lot of times what I have seen based on my experience is that entrepreneurs begin to believe that when the time arrives for them to sell their business, they'll kind of approach it the same way because they built an expertise. They get really good. An entrepreneur will get really good at what they do and they become expert. They're really at the top of their game. Nobody else in the market can do it as good as they can do it. And that is very gratifying. It is a stroking of the egos. And they really believe that when faced with tough challenges, they'll just be able to figure it out in real time. They'll just be able to draw that 6-shooter and nail the problem dead center, bullet right between the eyes type of situation. And you get kind of caught up in your confidence in being able to solve problems. And so when the time comes to sell your business, you think that you're just going to be able, through the sheer force of your personality and your ability to solve problems, that you'll just be able to sell your business and you're going to get top dollar for that business, and maybe even more than top dollar for your business, because this is what you've done time and time again through your business. And you're just going to make it happen. Unfortunately, that's not what the statistics and data shows. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here today, that successful exits are planned. They're carefully choreographed, and they just don't automatically happen. They can, but they just don't all the time. So I'm going to talk about a concept here that I kind of like, this word fungible. Does anyone out there know what a fungible commodity is, what the word fungible really means, and why it's important for entrepreneurs? I really like this word, and it really embodies in a concept that we hear a lot. So I'm going to just talk a little bit here about the definition of fungible. It's an adjective. If you go back to your English days in high school or college, it means that it's an adjective to be able to replace something with something else that's kind of identical. It's fungible. You take one thing and replace it with another. It's kind of it's not different. They're kind of mutually interchangeable. So that's what the word fungible means. And so how does that apply to entrepreneurship? So a fungible commodity for an entrepreneur is really the time that they have. So if you think about it, there are only so many hours in a day. And what an entrepreneur spends their time on will, to a large extent, determine what the enterprise value of their business really ends up being. So I want you to think about that. I want you to read that 3 sentences right there on the screen, that there are only so many hours in a day, and how you use those hours to a large extent is going to create value in your company. I think that's kind of self-explanatory. So fungible means that how you spend your time, whether you're spending on sales and marketing or you're spending it in the operations side of your business, time is that fungible commodity, and how you use it is how much value you're going to create in your company. So it will have a significant influence on the valuation of your business. And it's more just about how you allocate your time. Albert Einstein once said that one of the miracles, the 8th wonder of the world, was the concept of compound interest. And that concept of compound interest is that if you can create interest to make interest, and you may have heard this example before, but if you take a penny and you double it every day for 30 days. So if you start on day 1, you take that penny and you double it into 2 pennies. And then on day 2, you double that 2 cents into 4 cents. And then on day 3, that 4 cents becomes 8 cents, and that 8 cents becomes 16 cents, and then 32 cents, and 64 cents, then $1.28, and then $2.56 by the end of 30 days. You have hundreds of thousands of dollars that you've created by just doubling, and that's the power of compounding. And when you start thinking about how you apply your time in your business, that is a concept of compounding that time. If you are able to start creating value and you're thinking about an exit that's going to happen a year, 2, 5 years down the road, and you're able to use this fungible commodity of time and you apply it properly in your business, you start to create value. And the sooner that you're able to start creating this enterprise value in your business, the more it grows over time. That value isn't arithmetic. It doesn't go from, $10 to $11 to $12. It goes from $10 to $20 to $40 to $80. It has that exponential component to it. And that is really an important concept for entrepreneurs really to begin to understand, is this power of compounding and the use of your time. And so this comes back to that concept, the principle of what I said earlier. Why should you start planning for an exit now? Is because when you do, and you're able to apply your time appropriately in your business, you are able to create this compounding effect of the value of your business versus just sailing along, not worrying about it, thinking you're going to magically exit your business for a bunch of money down the road. It rarely happens. It just is something that, successful business exits are choreographed. So while time is important, there are other things that are equally important when it comes to building business value in your business. So let's chat about some of those. Positioning a company for a successful exit is as much about a thought process as it is about the time that you spend and how you allocate that time. So I've underlined that thought process, and I want you to think about that. A lot of people say that, I don't have time to think about selling my business. The big question we talked about a few minutes ago. I really don't have time to do that. I have the ability to solve that problem when the time comes. I'm just too busy right now. Well, what I want you to think about, it's not necessarily about the time that it takes to think about exiting your business. It's really about this thought process. And I'm going to give you some examples here, some real life examples. So let's take the example of a real estate lease. I'm going to share some stories from my podcast where an advisor, in this case, an M&A advisor, was working with one of his clients that was getting ready to sell a very successful business in the retail space. They had been in business for 25 years, and they were located in really a marquee location in downtown. It was a destination location. It was a kind of a historical part of the town. The building was well known in all of the neighboring communities around. When you would say you were located in the Pioneer Center, everyone knew where the Pioneer Center was. And the business had been there. The business owner was personal friends with the landlord. And every 5 years, that lease would come up, and the lease was always renewed without any question. There would be a slight bump in the rental rate, and things were really going along just great. And the business was really just coining money. They were growing. They were extraordinarily profitable. They had this great reputation. They sold a premium product. They had great margins on these unique and premium products that they had. They had a loyal customer base, not only in the retail customers, but they had commercial customers also. They had this very predictable sales growth. Their business was growing year after year. Their profits were growing. The margins were great. I mean, this was a phenomenal business. And it came time to renew the lease, and they did. They renewed the lease. They hadn't looked at the actual lease in, 20 years, and they just renewed the lease. And when the lease was sent over from the attorney, the owner just signed the lease because it was almost identical to the lease before. And so there was kind of some health issues with the owner and nothing really serious, but they thought it was time that they start thinking about an exit. And so they reached out to a mergers and acquisition advisor. They got the business financials in place and they started positioning the business ready for sale. And they had some buyers come. They had a number of buyers come to the table to buy the business. And they accepted one of the offers. And it was a great offer, had a lot of cash, not a lot of carryback. The terms were good. And it was really the perfect buyer to the business. And when you are selling a business, you kind of have a due diligence checklist that you go through. And one of the things on that checklist, if you have real estate and you are leasing property, one of the things that the buyer is going to want to see is the real estate lease agreement. And that's what happened here, just routinely. So they sent over the lease to the buyer's attorney. And a few days later, they got a call from the attorney on the other side that was reviewing the lease. And he called up the M&A advisor and he said, look, I'm reading through the lease here, and this lease is not assignable. Normally in leases like this, if the buyer of the lease has equal financial capability and qualifications, the lease is assignable and transferable to the new owner. But I see in this lease, it is not assignable. And so we have to execute a new lease. So we need to talk. We want to get permission for us to talk to the landlord so we can execute a new lease, because this lease that you have right now, which were under very favorable lease terms because the business owner knew the landlord who owned the building. They had always been friendly, and he had sort of given them the sweetheart deal, the good buddy discount. But now the business was up for sale and real estate prices had gone up a lot. And the rent had been tied to, per 2 or 3% increase year over year. But rental rates in the area had really skyrocketed and doubled and tripled in some cases. And so the buyer said, sure, go ahead and chat with the landlord. I'm sure he'll just work with you and sign a new lease, and we can move on with selling the business. And so that's what happened. Unfortunately, when the new lease was negotiated, the landlord didn't just re-sign the existing lease with a slight bump in rental rates. He tripled the rental rate, which brought it up to market at that time. Well, this was a complete shock to the business owner. He never, even in his farthest, thought process, he never thought that that was going to be an issue, because for the last 25 years, renewing the lease was very routine, very little discussion. Just sign the same lease, fine tune it a little bit. And he thought that was what was going to happen in this situation. Now, here's the problem. When you are looking at selling a business, this type of business that was a retail business, they're generally sold on a multiple of profits, net profits, the bottom line, something called EBITDA, or earnings before taxes, insurance, and amortization. And that's so. For an example, if you have $100,000 of profits or EBITDA, and you're selling at 4 times the bottom line profits, that $100,000 means that the business would sell for $400,000. It's just a mathematical calculation. You earn $100,000 and you can verify and validate that $100,000. The multiple is 4, it may be 3, it may be 5, but whatever that multiple is for the specific industry that you're in, you multiply that for your net profits that are reported on your tax returns. Well, in this case, we were talking, about a business that had $800,000 of profits. And that's what they were selling. And the multiple they were selling for was 5 times. And so at 5 times $800,000, it was about a $4 million, sale. And part of that profitability, that $800,000, part of that profitability was the lease deduction. And so they had a lease rate of about $100,000 that they were paying on an annual basis. And they that was calculated in the $800,000. This is important, so I want you to understand this. And so if you had $800,000 of profitability, part of that was a $100,000 deduction from the sales of the business, so without rent, if you took out rent, the profitability would have been $900,000, but you paid $100,000 in rent, and that made it $800,000. And now the landlord was going to triple that rent. And so the rent went from $300,000, from $100,000 to $300,000. Now you have a multiple of 5, because that was the multiple that was selling at. And so now you have an extra $200,000 of expenses that you were not planning on having. You had projected into your profitability numbers $100,000. Now it's $300,000, which is $200,000 more. It's a factor of 5. The multiple is 5. So you take $200,000 times 5, that's $1 million. So what actually happened in this situation is that the profitability of the business dropped by $200,000. The multiple was 5. So the sales price actually dropped $1 million. And so instead of selling the business for $5 million, you had a business of $800,000 for $4 million. Instead of selling it for $4 million, it sold for $3 million because all the buyer isn't going to absorb that cost. The buyer wants to buy the business at the multiple what the actual profitability of the business is. So in this case, by not really thinking ahead and not making sure that that lease was assignable, and that's what I think. It's about a thought process. So if the last time he had thought about executing that lease, if he had sat down and said, I've been looking at your lease here and I'd like to have it assignable, probably what would have happened is that the landlord, not thinking 2 or 3, 4 years down the road, would said, sure, that's fine. As long as you bring someone as qualified as you to the table, I'll transfer the lease to them and we can assign it to them. And I'll take you off of the lease at that time. Because that thought process didn't take place, the profitability dropped by $200,000. The multiple was 5. The value of the business dropped by $1 million. And so that's why it's important that you start having this thought process. I'll give you another example here. Employment contracts. For businesses that have key people in their business, it's really important that you have terms and an agreement with those people of what their responsibilities and role is, what their compensation is, how their bonuses are computed, what the expectations for performance are, non-competes, that they can't, go to work for a competitor and steal all of your customer list and go off and go to work for a competitor. Employment contracts are really important in a lot of cases. And a lot of times, because you've had these people working for you a long time, maybe for 5, 10, years or longer. You may or may not have an employment contract in place. You really should have, especially if you're thinking about at some point in stepping away from your business and exiting it. So I'm getting you back to this thought process again. So the thought process is that if you're thinking about selling your business and you go through the thought process and you say to so many of your employees, I think we need to get some employment contracts here. And you're thinking 2 or 3 years down the road that you're going to be selling the business, but this is one of the things you're going to want to take care of. So when it comes time to sell your business, you actually have those agreements in place. Well, again, another story from my podcast, Business Exit Stories. An advisor shared a story about an entrepreneur that was kind of a crusty old guy. He had a manufacturing company that did a lot of tool and die type of things where they made custom parts, for the aircraft industry, for the aerospace industry. And they had a customer list. But one of the key employees there that really understood the operations, backwards and forwards. He was really the operational component that made that business work. Initially, when the entrepreneur, 30 years ago had started that business, he was the person on the floor. He was on the machining tools, tool and die equipment. He was the guy that went out and made the contacts and got new customers. But as the business grew, he brought in this operational guy that had been with him for, over 20 years and really understood the business inside out. And the entrepreneur had really lost kind of touch with the business and what was happening out in the shop, and was spending a lot of time away, was making a lot of money. He paid this guy well. He paid him bonuses. He had a company car, paid his medical, had profit sharing, paid him well. The guy was well taken care of, but he didn't have an employment agreement. Now, they had an employment agreement at one time, but it had his role had changed and there wasn't a new agreement. Now, in the entrepreneur's mind, he thought he had an employment agreement in place and that it was in a filing cabinet someplace. And so when they went through, when the decision was made to sell the business and they went through and they looked at, what the business criteria were for due diligence, he said, sure, I have an employment agreement. And they said, fine. They checked that off. And when the actual offer arrived, they were going through the due diligence. They actually requested a copy of that agreement. Well, they went looking for it. Lo and behold, they couldn't find one. It didn't exist. They found the old one, but they didn't find the new for the operational kind of the COO, the chief operating officer. It just wasn't there. And so the entrepreneur says, oh, we'll just get him to sign a new one. And so they went with a new employment agreement that had all of these things that you would want in an employment agreement, that the buyer who was buying it wanted to make sure that that key guy was there because that's part of what he was buying. And so when the employment agreement was presented to him, the guy said, well, let me take a look at it. And he took it home. And obviously he looked at it, and for some reason, he decided to call up his attorney. And his attorney said, you really are in a good situation here. You could probably get more. Now, the M&A advisor had told this crusty old entrepreneur founder guy, that he should pay a signing bonus for signing that employment agreement. And he suggested a $125,000 signing bonus that would be paid over a period of 3 years. He would get $25,000 for signing it. The second year, he'd get another $50,000, so $75,000 in the first 2 years. And then in the third year, he'd get a $75,000 bonus if he stayed online. And that would give the buyer confidence that the operational component person, the COO, would be there. But the crusty old entrepreneur refused to do that. He said, I paid that guy. He's, more than he's worth, and I've given him cars and given him big bonuses. I'm not going to pay him another $125,000. Give him the employment agreement. He's loyal. He'll sign it. Well, as you can start to tell from the way I'm telling the story, is that The next day, when he came back, he said, I don't want to sign the agreement. I'm not going to sign it. And of course, the entrepreneur flies off of the handle and starts yelling and screaming and using profane language. And the operational manager, the COO, dug in his heels and says, I have an offer here from a competitor that's offering me a lot more money, and I'm going to go to work for him. And so what was going to be a very attractive multi-million dollar exit for this old crusty entrepreneur, he now had his key guy ready to walk out the door and go to work for a competitor. And so the long, short of the story, how this sort of unfolded is that the entrepreneur ended up writing not a $125,000 check, but ended up writing a $500,000 check to his key guy because he would not sign that employment agreement. Because he knew he had leverage, because without, the buyer was not going to move forward signing that agreement without having his key operational person in place and tied to the company. And so the employee got $500,000. It was still a good transaction, but I can tell you, you had one hot founder entrepreneur was very irate that his, quote, loyal employee would hold him up like that. So that is, again, this thought process that you kind of think through, that you need to really figure out and think about in advance. If you just simply had an employment contract that had been signed a year or two, I would have probably went on without any problem. The employee would have signed it. It wouldn't have been a big deal. But because he didn't have that thought process, thinking about what he's going to need to have in place 2 or 3 years down the road when he's going to sell the business, turned out to cost him a lot of money. You want to make sure that this thought process that you have, that you're capturing key data and metrics. So often, when it comes time to list a business or position it ready, get it ready for a sale, a lot of the key metrics just aren't available. You have to go back and almost do forensic accounting to try to extract that information out because you weren't diligent in keeping track of all those metrics. And I can tell you, especially if it's a financial buyer that is looking to, buy the business from you, you really have to have your act together when it comes to providing accurate financial statements and tax returns and key metrics. If you don't have that, you're actually just shooting yourself in the foot, because what that will do is that when you can't provide a complete financial picture to your business and it's kind of sketchy, some information is missing or it is not backed up with adequate detail, all that does is create a question mark in the buyer's mind. And question marks translate into risk, and risk translate into a reduction in price to offset that risk, or more, difficult terms, higher terms, and more challenging terms on how they're going to assume some of that risk. So when you don't have that key financial metrics and that data, that just translates into questions translates into risk translates into reduced valuation or more challenging terms or higher terms that you might not have to agree to if all that information was there in the first place. So the point of this slide here and this point of this discussion is really, it's a thought process. It's not necessarily about time, how you invest. It is, yes, and that's important, but it's also about this thought process. And that's why you need to start thinking it. It's not going to take you a lot of time to have a thought process. It's just going to take implementing certain procedures and processes in advance. So when it comes time to step away from your business and to exit your business, you have all of this information all teed up and ready to go. And that happens because you have the right process in place. Now, successful and profitable exits are all about understanding and following this process, this thought process that we're thinking about, and actual components that will, and I've really talked about this, and it's really a process that I've developed myself, is really the parachute exit process. Now, I use this metaphor of a parachute because, if you think about it, a pilot doesn't pack his parachute when his engines are on fire and the plane and is in a tailspin and headed to the ground. A pilot packs his parachute before he gets on the plane, and he has that parachute there in case something happens unexpectedly and the plane is going to have a crash landing, or maybe you have to abort before you even get to the point of landing the plane. And that's what I refer to as the parachute exit process, is that you position your business and you have a process in place and everything ready. So if something unexpected happens to your business, you just grab your exit parachute and you can sell your business or exit very quickly and with very little hassle, instead of trying to pack your parachute when the engines are on fire. So I want to talk a little bit about this parachute exit process now. So I'm going to use the acronym of parachute here. So P in the parachute exit process is really for planning and preparation. Now, that may seem bonehead simple, but I can tell you from experience that very few entrepreneurs plan their exit in advance. And not only in planning, if they do start planning, they don't go through the process of preparation. They just don't spend a lot of time thinking about it and putting things in place. Now, we've talked about some of the things that you can do. We talked a little bit about, the employment contracts that you need to have reviewed and in place. We talked a little bit about the equipment lease or the real estate lease that you need to review. We talked about some of those things and that those financial metrics and data that you need to accumulate. Well, there's a whole list of things I referred to as the due diligence checklist, the process that a buyer is going to go through. You really need to have your exit checklist that will kind of mirror and mimic what a buyer's due diligence checklist is. You need to be anticipatory. You need to have your due diligence checklist in place because you need to put yourself in the chair of a buyer and start thinking like a buyer. And so if you can just kind of close your eyes and project out into the future that at some point in time, you're going to want to be able to be sitting across the table from your buyer and providing him all the information that he's going to need. Just as if you were a buyer, you need to start thinking like a buyer and ask yourself, if I were buying my business, what would I want to see? Would I want to see financial statements? Would I want to see the real estate lease? Would I want to see, the tax returns? Would I want to see employment contracts? Would I want to see these type of things? Yeah, you probably would. If you were buying your business, you'd want to see those things. So you really need to put those things in place now. And so you have them ready when it comes time. The first A in parachute is really for addiction. I use the word addiction because a lot of times companies get really caught up in their customers and they focus on their most important customers, the customers that are bringing them the most business, and they think that's a great thing. They think having a customer having 10, 15, 40% of the sales coming from a customer is a great thing. Well, I can tell you from a buyer's perspective, it's not such a great thing. In fact, if you were a banker looking to lend money to a buyer who had 30 or 40% of his revenue coming from a single customer, you probably wouldn't provide a loan for that buyer because you have too much concentration of customer revenue. And this really becomes, a company really becomes addicted to that revenue. So if that customer decided to go someplace else, somebody made him a better offer to provide the product or service that you're offering at a better price, and you couldn't meet that price and they disappeared, and 40% or 50% or 30% of your revenue disappeared, how would that impact your business? It may cripple it. It may even crater your business. Well, that's how a buyer will look at it, and that's how a buyer's banker will look at it. So one of the things that you have to do is take a look at how much customer concentration that you have and revenue concentration that you have. You also have to look at your vendors. Now, right now, as this uh, presentation is being recorded, we have a situation in this country coming out of COVID where the supply chain from, China and Asia and other parts of the world has really gotten backed up. If you've been following the news lately, you have container ships in the ports along the West Coast, from Long Beach and San Diego and LA and Seattle and in the San Francisco Bay Area. You have all these ports where container ships can't unload because supply chain is all backed up, and there's the inability for having labor because of COVID for the longshoremen to be able to unload those ships, and even having available containers available because they're all waiting to be unloaded. The supply chain to have containers to load up and to get on the ocean to head for the States. You become very dependent on a supplier or a vendor. And if you have all of your suppliers with one individual, one company, that creates an addiction to that one vendor or supplier, and it really damages the salability of your company. And having that addiction to that one supplier, I could go on and share stories about how entire businesses have almost had to close, certainly couldn't get sold when a supplier addiction was in place, where the supplier either raised prices or started selling to a competitor that you didn't anticipate at a lower price than they were selling it to you. Can greatly impact the viability of your business. So that's one thing on this due diligence checklist. Also, we've talked a little bit about employees here, how important they are. And in this case, an employee addiction. If you have a key employee that you depend on, you better make darn well sure that that employee has a contract, that he's taken care of, that he's happy, that he isn't going to work for a competitor. I can share story after story of how key employees during the sales process, the exit process, have left the company and went to work for a competitor, literally destroying a company. I'll give you a very short story. In the restaurant supply business, there were a team of two guys that were the salespeople for a restaurant supply company that sold equipment to restaurants. And there's a traditional story of the entrepreneur had founded the business, used to do all this stuff himself. He brought in these employees, he paid them well. They became a little unhappy. He offered them, they wanted equity in the business because they were bringing so much value to the table. He refused to give them equity into the business. He did increase their bonuses and their salary so that they would be incentivized to bring more business in, but they really wanted this comfort and knowledge that for the business that they were helping bring in, that they would be compensated on an equity basis. The entrepreneur refused to do that. When the business went up for sale, they didn't have any equity. A competitor offered them a significant equity position in his company, offered to pay them more money and bigger bonuses along with the equity. When the business went up for sale, they simply left and they went to work for a competitor. And that really destroyed the ability of that entrepreneur to be able to sell his business, because his business took a substantial hit. And over time, as those customers left and went with the salespeople that they had a relationship with. So you really need to take a look at, your customers, your vendors, and your employee list on your checklist. R is for the different types of revenue that you have in your business. The revenue that you have is really, uh, uh, you kind of have one-off type of revenue. One-off type of revenue is really revenue that is generated from the initial sale. I'll use an example here of a moving and storage company. When a homeowner moves, they go online or they find a moving company, and the moving company gives a bid and they move that customer. Well, the likelihood of that customer coming back, especially if they've moved out of the area, is virtually nil. And so the moving company's revenue is kind of a one-off, non-repeatable type of revenue. And so the multiple, the value of that type of revenue may be 2x or 3x in a specific industry. So if you have, I'll use my example of $100,000 of profits and it's at 3x, your sales price would be $300,000 because of that's new. But if you have a type of revenue that would be considered renewable, a reoccurring revenue, that multiple may be 5x, 10x, or whatever the case may be, depending on the industry. I'll give you an example. In the heating and air conditioning, business, HVAC business, the HVAC business, particular company, again on the podcast, had gravitated from people calling up and looking for emergency type of situations to get their air conditioner fixed or their heating system revamped, and installing those new systems went from new installations to signing up their customers, especially their commercial customers and some residential customers, for an annual checkup. And that was on a subscription basis. And that you would not only have someone come out to your company at the beginning of summer to check your air conditioning system, and at the beginning of winter to check on your heating system. I'm giving it a tune-up at that time, but if you ever had an issue, you went to the front of the line, and that you were a preferred customer because you were a subscriber to their maintenance contracts, and you got very quick turnaround. And so every year the customer base was being renewed every year, and this became very predictable renewal type of revenue. And so most businesses can have this type of revenue created. You may have to get a little innovative to figure out how to create recurring revenue in your business, but if you do it, your multiple goes up. In the case of a heating and air conditioning company that is sold, may sell at 4 times revenue, again using our example of $100,000, sell for $400,000 at 4x revenue. But renewal, if a great majority of his revenue is renewal type of revenue, reoccurring revenue, the multiple can be 8 or 9 times. Instead of selling for $400,000, he'll sell for, $800,000 or $900,000, and that's a big difference just by changing the complexion of your revenue. And so that's why looking at your revenue type and categorization of your revenue is really important. The second A in the parachute process, exit process, is really for adopting a competitive moat. For those of you who are familiar with Warren Buffett, he likes to invest. He's one of the greatest investors of all time, has a company called Berkshire Hathaway. He likes to acquire companies that have a competitive moat. And so a competitive moat really starts out as a competitive advantage. What do you offer that your competitors don't offer? What's your unique positioning in the marketplace? If you have a competitive advantage because you can offer your services or products at a lower price, then that's a competitive advantage. If you have a known for your customer service, that's a competitive advantage. If you're known because you have a website or a supply chain that can provide products and services quicker than your competitors, that's a competitive advantage. If you take all your competitive advantages up and you put them together, you can create a competitive moat where no matter what your competitors do, they can't kind of breach the moat. And the word moat really comes from, medieval times when, lords and, kings at the time, they had a castle and they dug a moat around and filled it with water. And so attacking armies would have to cross that moat to be able to attack the castle and get inside of the castle and capture the castle. And so that's what a moat is all about. If you can create a competitive moat by stringing together competitive advantages, your competitors really can't breach that moat. You are somewhat impenetrable. And if you have a competitive moat, the value of your company can become much more than all of your competitors, and you can command a premium price for your business because you've created this competitive moat. C in the parachute exit process is really for culture, the culture you've created in your company. Now, that seems like a touchy-feely type of thing, but it is quite real, actually. Um, the culture you create really is about how your employees feel about the company, how your customers feel about your company, how your suppliers feel about your company. And this culture really is a differentiation. It can become part of your competitive advantage, which translates into a competitive moat. Companies that have a strong company culture of happy employees that take care of their customers generally sell for a higher multiple than companies, or they sell on better terms than companies that don't have this company culture. H in the exit process parachute is for the hierarchy of management. Now, what does that mean? Hierarchy of management. It sounds like a fancy term. A hierarchy of management is really about the ability for the business to operate without the entrepreneur being there on a day-to-day basis. And this really happens when the entrepreneur can actually not come in every day, can take a vacation of a few weeks or a few months and have the business just move on because you have people in place that continue to manage and operate the business when the entrepreneur is not there. And this is really important because if you're the type of business that requires you to be there every day before anything happens, when you come to sell your business, you're looking to replace yourself. And the universe of buyers out there is relatively smaller. And we're going to chat a little bit about that later in here. But the hierarchy of management is all about having people in place and a management team in place that can manage your business when you're not there. You, in the exit process, parachute exit process, is really to utilize scale both up and down. Now, most people are familiar with scale because that means you are growing your business, you're getting bigger, you're becoming more efficient, you're doing more volume, you're being able, because of the scale and the amount of goods and services you purchase, the cost of what you purchase those is lower. That is scaling up, and that's an advantage. There's also scaling down, becoming very niche oriented and not trying to be all things to all people, but picking a specific expertise and niche, and that you become really, really good in that niche. And so you scale from being very broad into, being very focused vertically on becoming an expert on what you do on a regular day-to-day basis, so that you are very niche oriented. And that's what is meant by scaling down. T in the parachute process is really that you need to be able to translate your business and the metrics of your business into value. So your performance on how your sales are growing, what your margins are, what your profitability is, what those key metrics in your business, that will translate into value. Now, you may have all of those metrics and they may fall and they may be very good. You may be able to have those, but if you can't compile those and share them with the buyer, and there's a lot of detail behind that, it's like not having it at all. And so you need to be able to translate, all that financial performance, accumulate that data. And if you can do that, that will translate into enterprise value in your business. And really the exit. E for exit is really the exit optimization for time and for materials that you need to really focus on that in your business. And that you are talking about timing, you are talking about terms that you're able to get, you're really talking about taxes. One of the things that entrepreneurs do a lot of the times is they really don't focus on the ability for uh, them to plan for taxes. They really don't, and they wait to the last minute, and they end up, taking a lot of time to not taking a lot of time to plan on how to reduce their taxes. And so that's really the parachute exit process when we're talking about uh, how to extract the most value out of your business. Now, why is it important for an entrepreneur to optimize and monetize all their hard work, to have this process in place? I'm going to share some numbers with you. The number 73. 73% of all entrepreneurs believe that that business ownership is the best way for them to generate wealth. 73%. Number 362. 362%, that's the amount of the average net worth that an entrepreneur has over his counterpart who's working for somebody else. So there is over 3.5 times amount of net worth that an entrepreneur has in his business and his total net worth than an employee will have. 70% of entrepreneurs' net worth is tied up into the business. Now think about that. If you have a net worth of $1 million, $700,000 of that net worth is tied up into your business. So here's another interesting number. 88. At least 88% of all business owners don't have a well thought out exit strategy. Think about that. 88% of you out there, almost 9 out of 10 of entrepreneurs don't have a well thought out exit strategy. So if an entrepreneur has 73% more equity, net worth, but this net worth is 362% more than their counterparts, and 70% of their net worth is tied up in their business, and 88% of you out there do not have a well-defined exit strategy, what does this really mean for you? What does it mean for you? So let me share you a couple of other numbers that will demonstrate what this means for everyone that's listening in today. Because the data doesn't lie. A typical business owner misjudges the value of their business by 59%. And this is one of the major reasons that businesses really don't get sold, is because they have this unrealistic expectation of what their business is going to be worth. And that's why deals don't get done. Now, this other number there, 80%, 80%, according to the American Business Brokers Association, businesses that are listed for sale on an annual basis, they do not find a buyer. Think about that. You have 100 businesses that are listed for sale. 80% of them, 80 of them are not going to find a buyer. They're just not going to get sold. If 80% of the businesses listed for sales don't find a buyer, then I think you need to decide now that you're not going to be one of those 80% of businesses that really can't find a buyer. The truth is that for every business out there that's properly positioned and prepared for an exit can find a buyer. Just like selling your home, there's a buyer for just about every business. Every home generally finds a new buyer, a new owner of the home. It's the same in a business. Every business can find a buyer if you do the right things to position that business for sale. Now, there's some key things for you to understand here, to understand the buyer pool. There are 4 types of buyers. There's a replacement buyer. There's the me buyer. I mentioned earlier, if you're the type of buyer that you have to show up every day and nothing happens until you are there, then you're really looking for a buyer that can fill that role, that will come in every day, be there every day, make things happen every day. The problem is that's a very small pool of people. There are very few people that can probably do what you do. Then you have the manager buyer. The manager buyer is someone that will buy a business because there is a manager there, that they don't have to be there. They can focus on growing the business, and there's an operations guy there that will take care of the running of the day-to-day type of business. And that is a larger pool of people. Then there's really the financial buyer. This is generally a private equity type of buyer, an investor group. They are buying the business to get a return on that investment because there's a manager buyer in place. You don't have to be there. They will invest in the business because they can see that they can apply capital to business to grow the business because the management team is in place and they're looking to get a return on that business. And then there's the strategic buyer. This is a buyer that will buy a business because of what the business does. And maybe they don't do the business. And I'll give you an example here, a real life example. One of the stories that were shared on the Business Success Stories podcast was about a buyer that had gone to the market to list his business for sale. And he had several offers for his business. And his advisor that he had brought on and retained to help him sell the business looked at the buyers that were at the table. He said, I think these are financial buyers to this business. I think we should look around for someone that's in your industry that doesn't really offer this software product that you offer. And so he did. They went out and did their homework, and they identified 2 strategic buyers in the for their business, and they approached those 2. Well, once these 2 strategic buyers were aware that this business was for sale, and they knew and understood how valuable the proprietary information and software and technology that this company had would mean for their business and what a competitive advantage it would give them, they started a bidding war. And eventually the business, and I'll use the example of $1 million. These aren't the actual numbers, but it was $1 million that the business was being offered for. Once they found out and the bidding war started, the business actually sold for $12 million because they got into a bidding war, and the company that wanted it the most threw the traditional valuation metrics out the window because they really believed that they needed to have this business, and they didn't want the competitor having this business because it would put them at a disadvantage in the marketplace. So they just wrote a check. They were able to calculate that they would be able to make back their $12 million between 1 and 2 years of owning the business because of its strategic importance to them. They already had a customer base that would buy the acquired company's products. And so that's what a strategic buyer is. And so you really have to decide and understand what type of buyer you're going to be looking for. And if you do, then you start the process in advance of preparing to appeal to that type of buyer. Now, there are 5 things you need to do now to position your business for an eventual exit. You need to run your business like you're going to sell it next year, because you just might have to. And even if you don't, you'll be ready. And that's what this whole metaphor of the pack your parachute, having your parachute packed, ready to go if something happens to your business. You start focus on becoming non-essential to the day-to-day operations of your business. You just you focus on that. You want to be able to do that. You also want to be able to focus on replacing yourself so that you can take a vacation and that your business can operate without you being there. You want to be able to provide accurate and detailed financial picture of your business. And we've talked about that quite a bit here. You decide who the buyers are going to be. We talked about the replacement buyer, the buyer that is going to be a financial buyer, a buyer that's going to be a management buyer, a buyer that's going to be a strategic buyer. You really need to decide on who those buyers of your business might be in the future, and then kind of positioning your business for that. Then you need to kind of pick a projected exit date. Not that necessarily that you're going to sell when that date arrives, but that you'll be ready to. That date will probably change 4 or 5 times. It may come sooner, it may come later, but you really need to kind of work toward a specific date in mind. Now, the key takeaway here is that I don't think you should procrastinate. Don't procrastinate to begin the process of thinking about positioning your business for an eventual and profitable exit. You really need to begin now. You want to be able to begin now. So I see that we have a couple of questions here that have come in on the chat. I'm just going to take a few minutes to answer those questions now. And you can always email me if you want to have additional questions answered. Just email me at mstorm, M as in Marvin, storm as in the weather, at businessexitstories.com, and I can answer any questions that you might have. So one question we have here is, do I really need a business broker or an M&A person to help me sell my business? That's a great question. You really don't necessarily need one. You may want to do it yourself, but I can tell you, let me just share a story with you. During pre-COVID time, there was a business, again, shared on the Business Exit Stories podcast, that listed his business for sale because he had inbound interest. Someone called him up and said, I'm thinking of getting into this business. I see that you've been in business a while. I'd be interested in buying your business. And they started talking, and they arrived at a purchase price for that business. And they arrived at $1 million purchase price, although that wasn't the amount of money that was offered. But for illustration purposes, $1 million. And they were just getting ready to close. They had all the documents prepared and everything, and they were just getting ready to close the sale, and COVID hit. Well, everyone knows what happens when COVID hit. The buyer said, I just need to take some time to think and see what happens here, and so he went away. Well, the seller was all geared up. He had gotten into this frame of mind. He wanted to sell his business now. So he went out and he wasn't using a business broker or an M&A person at this time, but he went out and found one. And the M&A person that came to the table said, well, I think you should do a couple of things to get your business a little bit differently positioned here. If you'll follow my recommendations, then I think we can get more than the $1 million that you were offered for your business. And so that's what they did. It took a couple of months, 3 months to get everything ready. And then the M&A advisor went out into the marketplace again and got some interest from prospective buyers. Well, he also contacted the buyer that had originally made the offer. And to make a longer story short here, the person that actually ended up purchasing that business, now there were 2 or 3 other people that were interested in purchasing the business. The original buyer that had made the original offer paid 3 times more for that business because he had competition and because he wanted that business. It was a good business and it fit strategically into what he was doing, and he paid 3 times more. That would have never happened if he didn't have an advisor. So the question is, do I need an advisor, or can I do it myself? Yes, you can do it yourself. Probably not a good idea. You will probably always get more for your business, even though you're going to pay quite a bit of money in success fees and commissions for an advisor that's going to help facilitate your business. I can tell you that it's generally, in most 95% of the cases, worth that money. Another question here is, when is the best time to sell my business? That's another great question. What I'll tell you is that you never want to sell your business when you're right at the peak, that you have no more growth to go. You always want to sell your business as your business is scaling and the buyer can see additional growth. Just put yourself in the position of a buyer. Would you buy a business that you could see no additional future growth in the business? Maybe. If you did, you probably wouldn't pay a lot of money for that business because there's no more growth potential. So you always want to position your business so the buyer can see that there's more growth potential down the road. So that is one of the things that you need to consider. It's not so much about when, it's really knowing that when you actually get to the point where you're considering an exit and you're going to hire an advisor, you want to make sure that the buyer can see that there's more growth. Well, I can see we're about out of time right now. So if you need additional questions answered, just email me at mstorm@businessexitstories.com, and I will be able to answer any questions that you have. Go to wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, search for Business Exit Stories and subscribe. That podcast has a number, for every episode has 4 transactions that we talk about, 2 good and 2 transactions that didn't go so well. And the advisors kind of walk you through, and there's some really great takeaways for that. So this is Marvin L. Storm telling you that I hope that you are able to convert and monetize your hard work, and that you really should start planning now, thinking about the process. You don't have to put in a lot of time actually preparing your business for an exit, but you need to start thinking about the things you need to do to get your business ready for an eventual exit. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you, for any of you that have questions out there. And if not, I'll see you on my podcast, Business Exit Stories.